Hello.
Hi.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Everyone.
Yes, how are you?
I'm good, thank you.
We already got some participants.
Wow, have we? 1,600.
Yes. We'll start
can they
in 9
see
minutes, I
So
guess.
can they see our screen yet, Sultan?
Yes.
They can. So we should really put up the screen share.
Greg, would you like us to mute ourselves and put our camera off during the time of somebody else speaking?
I think if we can, whilst I'm introducing you, if you and Susie have your cameras on, then when Susie's speaking, we can turn ours off, and when you're speaking, I can turn ours off, and then we'll all turn our cameras on for the Q&A. Is that all right?
Sounds good.
Okay.
So when we're speaking, cameras on and then off. So when I hand over to Arif, I turn myself off. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So if you like, until I start, we could all three of us turn our cameras off. Susie, did you hear that? Good evening, everybody. Thank you for being with us this evening. Tonight's webinar comes to you from the Healthcare Leadership Academy in Saudi Arabia. The Academy was established to develop accountable leadership for exceptional healthcare across the kingdom and beyond. This is the second in a series of webinars focusing on leadership in times of crisis. And tonight's focus is going to be on leading teams. My name's Greg Young. I'm a senior consultant with the Academy, and I'm moderating this evening's event. And before I introduce the two speakers this evening, I'd just like to let you know that everybody on tonight's event is registered, and you'll be receiving your CME hours very shortly. In addition, the intention is to speak for about 20 minutes with the two speakers, and then we'll take questions from you for a further 15 to 20 minutes. So I very much look forward to receiving your questions, which you can use the facility at the bottom of your page to do that. As I said, anything to do with CME hours, you will be receiving your CME hours shortly. So if the questions would be confined to the content of this evening's discussion, that would be marvelous. Thank you very much. So first, I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Susie Perks-Baker. Dr. Susie is a senior advisor to the Academy and a program director for the Pioneer program, which is groundbreaking. And it's the first bespoke program for women leaders in the healthcare run right across the kingdom. When she's not advising the HLA, Susie has built a wealth of experience with the King's Fund in the UK. Here she provides a number of services, including coaching, leading learning networks, and directing their acclaimed Athena program. Our second speaker this evening is Arif Al-Mubarak, who is an ICF accredited coach, specializing in leadership development and team coaching. Arif's also an associate with the Center for Creative Leadership as an executive coach and facilitator. What I like about Arif is that he's converted his passion into both a business and a way of life. He's strongly anchored in the belief that unfolding one's true potential through inner evolution and self-development is nature's way and is therefore inevitable. So I look forward to hearing from both of our speakers, and I also look forward to receiving your questions. So Susie, if I can hand over to you, please, and invite you to begin.
All right, salam alaikum. Thank you, Greg. Thank you for inviting me to speak. And although I can't see all our listeners, thank you to them for tuning in. And given I'm speaking to the healthcare community, thank you for all you're doing, indeed, during this time of crisis. So our title, Leading Teams During a Crisis, what occurred to us as we were talking about it earlier today is crises tend to be time limited, and healthcare teams tend to lead disasters or major incidents or CPRs for a very short period of time. And what, of course, COVID is challenging us all with is we'll be leading teams over quite a sustained period of time of increasing complexity, not less. So my point in mentioning that really was that one leadership style, let's say command and control, which may be appropriate in a clinical crisis situation, is certainly not the one style that's going to get us all through over the current months and the coming months. So I'm making an early bid to think about a range of leadership styles. The other things that we talked about when we were preparing this was how big the leadership literature is, and indeed the teamwork literature as well. There's a great deal of it out there. So what might be helpful for you? We had that conversation. We also had a conversation around how many webinars there are at the moment, many of which are called things like Leading Teams in Crisis. So what could we do for you that might be particularly helpful? I've had the pleasure and the honor, if you wish, of coaching a number of leaders across the kingdom over the past few weeks. And they are all leading teams, they're members of teams. And in order to offer you something that we thought might be helpful for you, we thought we'd start with some of the data that has actually emerged from the kingdom and use it as a think point, really. So that's what we're going to do. So it's anonymized, of course. There were many very interesting points about leading and leadership that have come up in the data. Very positive in terms of the innovations that people are making, the level of adaptability that's been required, the level of cross-system working, not just cross-system in healthcare, but cross-agency as well, move from much silo working to having to connect on all sorts of levels. So I have a long list of very strong leadership practices that came out of the data. And of course, while we were talking, people talked about the problems that they're encountering as well, the issues that they're encountering in their leadership role, with much actually, but including with their teams. And what we did after we've spoken to people was map some of this against some of the models of teamwork that are available in the literature. And there's just two, we've only got time to show you two, but I wanted to show you two tonight. They're old but gold. They're seminal pieces of work, one from the early 90s and one from the early 2000s. And all the work that's come after it really around teamwork are derivative of those. Their refinements have come since, but they're derivative of these two modules. So Greg, if you don't mind putting the next slide up, just so I can speak to it, that would be great, please. Greg, are you able to do that?
Sorry, Susie, I've pressed the button, but it's not moved.
Oh, right. I wonder if that will move if I do. Oh, dear. Okay. Okay.
So maybe
well, let's not waste people's time. If someone in tech could help us move on to the next slide, that would be really helpful.
There we are.
That's great. Thank you, whoever that was. Thank you very much. So this is from a book called The Wisdom of Teams. Let's just stay with that slide, please. That would be great. First published, as I say, in the early 1990s. And so through some of the conversations I was having with people, it made me think about this model again, in terms of what sort of team are you in? So I'll just put my glasses on here. So you can see here, we've got 4 different teams, types of teams mentioned. One, a working group, which is effectively individuals coming together, doing their work, but no real sense of common purpose or mutual accountability, and then going away again, not invested in the results particularly. The next one down, the least effective, so I'm going to the bottom of the curve now, I hope you can all see that, is the pseudo team, which is a name I love really, and they think they're a team. They often are engaged with each other and that sort of thing, but again have no real sense of purpose, accountability, what they're mandated to do, who they're accountable to, how and in what way. And so the whole thing about a collective endeavor is missing from that. As I say, they're the weakest. The next one up, so we're moving up the arc now of performance, is around the potential team. And this is what you see in most organizations, very particularly in healthcare organizations, although I think there are a lot more real teams emerging in the light of this crisis. So the potential team is a group of people working together who have great potential, have some sense of common purpose, mutual accountability, the interdependence of roles, but much more work needs to be done. It won't surprise you that the real team, so I'm moving further up that line there, it has got this down to a fine art, and they're working effectively. The high performance team right at the top has a lot of similarities to an agile team, and they're the rarest. A small group of people consistently successful in very demanding situations. So I'll just take a breath there. And so some of the work that we did with people was get them to think about what type of team do you think you're in? Are you effective, and how do you know? So that's one model that's been found to be useful. Greg, if you'd be kind enough to put the next slide up, that would be great. So this is a model from the early 2000s, 2002 to be precise, Lencioni. And this is from some work that was done with executive teams all over the world, actually. And in virtually every team that they worked with, they found that there were a number of common dysfunctions which hindered performance. And some of the data that came out of the coaching that we were doing in Saudi, we could map against this model. So that's why I'm showing it. So right at the bottom there, absence of trust, which shows up in all sorts of ways. Fear of speaking, not really being clear on what you're there for, not feeling comfortable to ask either. Fear of conflict, so this is the inability to have any disagreements or cognitive dissonance or to challenge in any way. And that often results in what we call, where I work, we call that a culture of niceness. Everyone's incredibly nice to each other, and actually that hinders the work of the team because what's really needed isn't being said. So it's a sense of artificial harmony. Lack of commitment, people not really being clear what the objectives are, the goals are, what their part is in that, and how they relate to the overall purpose of the organization and indeed the team. Avoidance of accountability shows up all the time, sadly. That results in low standards across the patch. And then the top one there, inattention to results. So not having any particular interest in the impact of your work and what you're doing, whether that's work is measurable or not. So those are very useful boxes, if you like, to put a lot of data in when you're talking to leaders about how it's going in their teams. And on what is my left side, there are some prompts there about what leaders can do in terms of opening up, being vulnerable, creating trust, pursuing quite hard to find out what the conflict is, where is it, really forcing on clarity, making sure people get, your team are bought into what they're supposed to be doing. Accountability for performance, and that's both individual and also mutual accountability, and the focus on the collective outcomes. What are you all there to do? So two quick run-throughs of two team models, which I know well and have found very helpful, and I hope will be helpful for you. You'll notice at the bottom, and which has got the sort of biggest box, if you like, is this business about absence of trust. And that covers all sorts of things, including the ability to feel safe and work with your colleagues in a team. And this notion of psychological safety is something that Arif is going to pick up with us. So I will turn my camera off, but handing over to my colleague Arif now to pick up around this notion of safety and trust in teams.
Thank you, Susan. First of all, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. What I did, same thing as Susie did for the past 4 months, we've been coaching people. And what I have figured out or find out that most of the data I have collected it falls into three areas: trust, psychological safety, and resilience. And this is what I will be taking you through tonight on those three areas. So as Dr. Susie said, trust is one of the most important things in building teams. And it's the basis of cultivating a safe and healthy workplace. It is something that we cannot express in words, actually. You can't tell people, trust me, and then it will go through. It's actually something that to be felt with others. It's radiant from within, and it's something that you would feel it. And if we unpack trust comes in three competencies, the way I understand it, and the way we have conveyed also to our clients, our leaders, to focus on. One competency is trust in communication, and one competency or one area is trust in capability and trust in character. And it's actually is not only as an individual that you have to show trust, or that people would trust you. And we have to look at it as a trias, and it's trusting self and trusting others, and also trusting the process and the climate the team collectively wants to create. So you could exchange that, the process, you could change it with the system, you could change it with the environment, but it has to be in a trias basis. So then the question is, what kind of a climate do we want to create for our team? So if the answer is a safe and healthy climate, then we need to highlight the psychological safety. And I want to say something here, and I will remind you with it later during my presentation, is I want you to remember that your team will take in your emotion. Just remember that. Now, before I talk any further on the other elements of psychological safety, there was a study done by Google's in 2017, and this is a study called Project Oxygen Research. And it was in the premises of what makes a great team. And the whole notion is about answering this question: what makes team effective at Google? And the outcome of that study is 5 dynamics. One of them is psychological safety. The other one is dependability, and then structure and clarity, meaning and impact. Now, we will not be focusing on the other 4 dynamics, but we will be focusing on the psychological safety, because of those 5 dynamics of effective teams that the research have shown and identified, psychological safety was by far is the most important one. It's actually the bedrock of effective team. So what Google refers to when they say psychological safety, it actually refers to an individual perception of the consequences of taking interpersonal risk, or a belief that team is safe for risk taken in the face of being seen as either ignorant or incompetent or negative or disruptive. Now, but in team with high psychological safety, teammates feel safe to take risk around their team members. They feel confident. No one in the team will embarrass or punish anyone else for admitting their mistakes, asking questions, or offering new ideas. And that is precisely what encourages innovation and creativity. So before going back to other key elements of the psychological safety at the workplace, I want you just to go back on reflect on your previous experiences and think about a time when you worked with the worst team and when you worked with the best team. Now just ask yourself a question: what made the team worse or best? And then we will look at the other elements and see if they make sense to you, if they support your answer about best or worse. So one of these elements is safe to speak. So what do we mean by that when we're talking about in psychological safety context? Is safe to speak is allowing them to express their thoughts and feeling without fearing of being judged, and make them feel they are heard, they have a voice. And the other elements is a culture of learning. Now, we know very well we like to tell, but that does not create a culture of learning. So ask them rather than telling them, and encourage them to ask the questions, clarifying the questions if they have doubts, and invite inputs. For example, you could say, what do you think? And model fallibility. So nobody is really perfect. You could say, for example, to emphasize on the psychological safety with your team, you could say, I may miss something, I need your help. So that's vulnerability. And vulnerability is really important to be practiced and shown from leaders. The third key element is support of the team. So when one of members of the team admitting their mistakes, make them feel they are backed up, supported, support their idea, celebrate their success, and always remind them of the nature of the work they created, of the work, what it means to them. And before moving to another topic, I want to say psychological safety, what we mean here is not really creating a comfort zone, but the intention behind that is to create accountability. So how can team be able to create climate of psychological safety, and what would help? Greg, can I have the next slide, please? Greg, thank you. So what we're talking about here is what might help in coping with our own stress and help others to be resilient. Remember what I said, your team will take in your emotion. So let's define what is resilience. Now, resilience is our ability to bounce back from diversity. It's what allows us to recover from change or hardship, whether in the workplace or in life in general. Now, what is not is more important as well. What is not resilient is not a burnout, is not abusing employee by saying, oh, come on, you need to be resilient. It's not that at all. That's not the intention here. So what can organization or a team leader or a leader can help in here? Now, there are three elements, as you see in the slides, that the HR or the team leader can do. They could encourage them to make, they could educate people about resiliency. And what is the intention behind that is to encourage them to make time for wellness. So here we can help people to understand there are specific practices and habits they can do to be better and perform better in their job. Help them to connect these behaviors in a healthy way to improve their job performance. Now, the other thing is to provide resiliency building opportunities at work. So mostly here we're talking about physical resiliency. So some organization, they can have on-site gym, or you could motivate them to go to a fitness class. And some organization actually compensate for the classes. You could invite a yoga teacher to the workplace, which I know some organization in Saudi in the public sector, they do that as well sometime. And Another important thing here is in providing resiliency building opportunities is to create parameters around using emails. So sometimes we tend to get emails from outside to be sent in the middle of the night. Just make sure that people know they don't always expect to respond immediately, and especially for those emails. So that would really help them. Another thing is we consider contemplative practice. Lately, mindfulness is being really popular in many organizations, big organizations like Google, like even up to the army. And it's a simple way to lead better. Now, there are mindfulness programs to help people learn how to pause and quickly regain focus. But if we look at some of the techniques in mindfulness, can be done at home, it could be done at your desk, it could be even done in your meetings, simple as just focusing on your breath for 1 minute or a couple of minutes just to regain focus. These things would help you to cope with stress, to also be resilient. So I'm going to present to you 8 steps that could help you as a leader or as an individual to become more resilient. Next slide, please, Greg. So I'm going to go quickly over this, and if we want to go dive deep in any of them later. So accept change. As you know, change is a constant, and it's inevitable. So accept rather than resist. Learning continuously. We have to learn new skills all the time, gain a new understanding, and most importantly, those new skills, those understanding, apply them during the change. And don't hold on to those behaviors or skills that especially and obviously they don't work anymore. And the third one is take charge. So embrace self-empowerment. Be your own agent. Take charge of yourself. Do not blame others. Take responsibility. Be autonomous being. And then define purpose. Defining purpose is really an important point here, as develop your personal why, your personal message, your personal mission that gives your work meaning. Have a clear sense of purpose. Help you to assess setbacks within the framework of broad perspective, and have always a new perspective, which would help being resilient. Fifth one is creating balance. Now, career is not the only aspect of your life. So I think we need to do some kind of separation, consciously, mindfully, separate who you are from what you do. What you do is not who you are. And then cultivate relationship. So here we need to develop relationship in a broad network, personal and professional relationship. Personal relationship that create strength and strong base for support. And remember, relationships are also important for your team. And in reflect, make time to reflect. Making time to reflect can help you to handle stress, uncertainty, and setbacks. Reflection also fosters learning and new perspectives and a degree of self-awareness, which is really highly important to enhance our resilience. And lastly is reframe skills. So question all the time, and even sometimes change your definition of yourself, your career. Reframe how you see your skill, how you see your talent, and how do you see your interests. And lastly, I will leave you with this as a message. As a team leader, as an individual, I promise to remind you, your team will always take in your emotion. Now, as a leader, when you take care of yourself physically, mentally, and emotionally, you will be able to rebound back and recover quickly and harmoniously. You will be emotionally stable. Hence, you will be able to provide that safe place that we all aspire for. And for your team is to create psychological safety. And deprive cannot provide. Thank you. Back to you, Greg.
Thank you, Arif. Let me just turn my video on so I can reappear. And thank you, Dr. Susie, as well. We've got some questions coming in, so I hope you're tightly coiled to give some good answers here. What I would like to do is to focus on questions which I think will give the maximum help to the audience that we have this evening. And we've got one question coming which intrigued me, but I think it's probably quite common, certainly in systems that I've seen. So it's coming anonymously, and you'll understand why when I tell you the question. So the question is how can you maintain psychological safety in your team when faced as the leader with a lack of psychological safety coming from above? So how if you like, and this is a question to both Arif and to Dr. Susie, you know, how can you create that psychological safety in yourself and your team, acting as an umbrella, if you like, from the system around you and in the lack of psychological safety that's coming your way?
I don't know if Arif wants to pick that up as he spoke psychological safety.
If you have anything to add.
Yeah.
Yeah. Would you like to
Yes,
add anything, Dr. Susie?
I suppose I was thinking about that the whole, just because you haven't got psychological safety yourself, which I think is what the question was about, from above, it does make it harder, without any doubt, to create that for the rest of your team, but not impossible in any way. And I think resources come from a lot of places. There are a number of resources one might tap into in order to be able to build your own resilience and your own sense of emotional and professional well-being in the workplace. And it is difficult for sure if you're not feeling contained, if you wish, from above, but it doesn't mean that you abdicate responsibility for your team.
What I would
Would you
add
like
here,
to,
yeah, what I would like to add here, Greg, is I think we're all responsible for our own self, for our own emotional bank credit, and our own resilience. It is difficult if we're not getting support from above, from the top, but that doesn't mean that we cannot create it within our own team. I think we have to start with our own, we have to start with ourselves, and hopefully our team will pick it up. And I don't have an answer to how can we make the top management, senior management, provide us with that safety if it's not implemented already or if it's not aware.
Okay, thank you, Arif. I think that's really good, and it also draws into my own mind of what you were saying about control the things that you can control. So providing your team with psychological safety, even if you're not getting it from above, is a really important thing. There's a second part to this question actually, and it's related, but it's not directly related, and that's how do you balance showing, you know, when the times are really tough. How do you balance showing your own vulnerability without, if you like, discouraging your team in those really difficult times? So, Susie, if I
Sure,
just to
happy to
allow Arif to gather his thoughts.
Sure.
Yeah, please do.
And then Arif, please pick up. So when we're talking about building trust and demonstrating vulnerability, that wasn't an encouragement to completely bleed out inappropriately to your team. Your team have to be contained, for absolutely sure. But it's about there is a strength sometimes in admitting that you don't know something, that you will find out, but you don't know something. And there are many leaders, for example, who struggle with that. That's just a little bit making oneself too vulnerable, for example, to admit that you don't know, when actually not knowing is sometimes a very intelligent thing to admit to. But also working with your team, well, how will we find out? How will I find out? Let's work on this together. So that's what's suggested by, that's an example of vulnerability, if you like, rather than completely falling apart. That wasn't what was encouraged. But I do also take the point that there is something about maintaining the strategic imperative, about not being taken down into the weeds too much, and having to maintain a positive way forward, a problem-solving approach to work with people and take them out, rather than just staying in the doom and gloom. And I suspect that's what whoever was asking the question is, you know, if you're staying downbeat too much, won't that affect your team? Well, of course it will. Arif, is there anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think all leaders in the world today, globally, if they claim they know everything, I think that's the biggest the biggest fault. You can't know everything, whether you're the top president or top CEO or a team leader. We don't know everything. Let's just admit it. Admitting it, showing that vulnerability does not put us down, does not take anything from our integrity, that doesn't take anything from our position or hierarchy. When you say something, when you say, you know, guys, we're stuck here and I don't know and I need your help. As simple as that, you're showing your vulnerability. I know as a culture, we're not used to this, but I think what I have seen from most successful leaders after coaching is whenever they are vulnerable, whenever they show their vulnerability, the team picks up, the team actually get excited, the team get encouraged to show their vulnerability as well. Hence, the work gets more productive as well.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. If I might move on then to another question. And there's a question here asking, are there any support measures in the current healthcare system to help deliver trust, support, and freedom of asking in that lack of bias? So is there any support measures in the current healthcare system that might help in delivering those sorts of things? Arif, if I could ask that to you, I think.
Yeah, I don't know if there is a particular measures that encourages that, but I know there are two initiatives to show, to encourage people to show their vulnerability and to ask for help. And there is one initiative called DAM that's mostly counseling, and there is another initiative, new initiative called NAB, which is mainly targeted to those healthcare workers in the hospitals, COVID-19, and it's about coaching. And the response is really good when we have launched that. And I think that kind of support what actually is needed now. As a matter of fact, Greg, I'm glad you asked this question. One of the bases that we use in NABA in this initiative in coaching is the resilience assessment. So people will know exactly where they are and their resilience. That would provide immense support to them along with the coaching smear. We have 35 coaches around from the region. They're all certified, they're all accredited from the International Coach Federation, and they're willingly and voluntarily willing to help those people and to give us support. And that initiative is coming from the Saudi Commission.
So Arif, if somebody was interested in that initiative, how would they connect with it?
I think getting in touch with the Saudi Commission website or Twitter, there is a link. They can get in touch with the Healthcare Leadership Academy. They can get in touch with me as well. we will lead them through that.
Great, thank you very much. I have another question here, and this might come to you, Susie, if that's okay. Somebody's asking, how can I shift my potential team to being a real team?
I'm not surprised at that question because of the existence of so many potential teams that don't go on really to become real teams. But that doesn't mean they can't. There's potential in everybody to grow. The one tip, given that that was the question, would actually be to take the 5 dysfunctions of a team model and start there with some teamwork. It's often helpful to have an outside facilitator or a team coach work on that with you, but not essential. Leaders can do it themselves. If you're thinking, how on earth do I move things in a slightly different direction and raise the performance of this team? Starting with that model might be a really useful way to begin to generate conversations around each of those areas, and almost to do a diagnostic as well around each of those areas. One of the people that we spoke to this week said that she had a team of 25 working in a particular region in Saudi, and but 5 or 6 of them she could really count on and were working well with her, and which left an awful lot of people not working, as far as I could make out. I don't know if that's actually the case or not, but that immediately took me into the realm of what's the dysfunction here? What's the commitment? Are they not sure of their purpose? So, as I say, using that model might be a really helpful way to start. Not the only way, but it might be a helpful way to start.
Okay, so there's another question here that kind of leads on from that one.
Right.
So if I might stay with you, Dr. Susie, for the time being, and the question goes, how can we support and protect each other in work or in any place if there is no 100% cooperation, not just in the pandemic time, but in any time? So this is around, the cooperation from the big leader to the small leader. How can we encourage everyone in that way?
I need to check I've understood the question. So I think there was a suggestion that moving on in a positive way might sometimes be difficult because of lack of collaboration. Is that right, Greg?
My interpretation of the question is that, how can we support and protect each other where there isn't 100% cooperation, not only in the time of the pandemic, but in normal times, from, if you like, the most senior leaders to those frontline leaders. So how can we encourage this culture of cooperation?
I think that's a great question, actually, and it also takes us into both self-care and care for others. And one of the things that comes out of the leadership literature, and it certainly came out of the data from the people we spoke to across the kingdom, is some really extraordinarily committed work on behalf of the whole, and great concern for their team, genuinely, and a complete absence of concern for self and lack of self-care. So in the end, the leader was role modeling that self-care doesn't matter in any way, and that working all hours and burnout and all of that sort of thing was acceptable. So before we fix everyone else, there's something about looking at yourself as well. And there's that expression about putting your own oxygen mask on before you give other people's. You will be unable to support each other, which was a key point of that question, if you have no resources, if you have paid no attention to support yourself in any way. So the notion about thriving rather than just surviving, and self-care not being a a bad thing at all, role modeling that is a useful place to start.
Yeah, thank you, Susie. Arif, if I might come to you now with a question, give Dr. Susie a rest. Is a question coming again? It's another anonymous question, and I'm going to read it out verbatim because I think that might give you the gist of it. And it says, it's hard to cope sometimes because leaders cannot accept their fault. So how to do resilience if there is a hindrance to do it and make you feel down and when your confidence becomes low? So this is a question around resilience and self-confidence, and how do you manage those two?
Well, to pick myself up from unconfident to be confident, I need to see where is it really coming from. And if I'm not getting enough support from people around me, then that leaves me with how am I going to deal with myself. So the question is how to pick up resilience. Is that what it is?
Well, I think it's a combination of resilience, but also how do you manage your self-confidence? Because it's an element of resilience, you know, when things aren't easy.
Well, I think technically you're there in your position because you're chosen for your competency. There is no doubt about the confidence in the technical work. But when we're talking about the confidence in psychologically to do the job and to take care of my self-resiliency, I think there are many, many elements to this. If I am going to blame the environment and not looking at myself, then I'm not going to get there. So I'm going to start to look at myself first. What can I do? I think some of these practices that also can give you clarity. Where does it stem from? Where does the hindrance is stemming from? If I just give up and give in to the emotion, give in to the what am I really going through, I think I'm just going to stay there in the dip. I need support. I need to ask for help. So go and ask for help. If you can't get out of it, just go and ask for help. I can't get out of this. I need somebody to help me. And we do. We all do need somebody to help us, whether we're CEOs, whether we're coaches, whether we're top leaders. Go and ask for help.
Thank you. We've got a question here from somebody who's just sent a message in. Can we provide an email for people for if they want to get in touch with us? I'm thinking about the coaching initiative that you were talking about. Is it possible that they could? Do you have an email that they could contact you on, Arif?
Yeah, almubarakarif@gmail.com. Al-Mubarak Arif is one word, ALMUBARAK. Arif. If the technical team can put it on the somewhere in the chat or in the Q&A, that would be good.
That's great.
If not to Greg, they can reach to anybody in HLA, and we can assist them.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I think we're coming to our last few questions now. So this is one for you, Dr. Susie. So in a team dynamic, where if you like, should the boss be? Should the boss be above the team or part of the team if you want to avoid the failure of the team?
Okay, so that's interesting, isn't it, that the word above came in, that above the team. So the teams that work most effectively are where people are clear on their role and their role boundaries. And the boss, as I'm just using that phrase because it was in the question, is part of the team. But there's something called role differentiation. They have a slightly different role to the others because they have been given a different role. But it isn't a question of being above anyone else. There's a lot in the literature about where hierarchical leadership is no longer seen to be appropriate. It's quite an old model. It does work in some situations, but in this very complex environment in which all of us are leading and working, a much more differentiated model of leadership is shown to be much more effective, actually. And there are different names for that in the literature, you know, distributed leadership or collaborative or collective or shared, all of those sorts of things. But they essentially pivot around the idea that of course you have a leader or a boss, but everybody has accountability for contributing to the purpose of the team, and within parameters can pick up their own leadership skills and authority, and that there is an interplay, if you like, between the leader or the boss, as whoever it was wrote that question, and the other people in the team and the situation, and that it's a relational activity, this business of leading anyway. So is the boss above you and not in the team would be a very different model to one that's been shown to be effective in the kind of complexity in which we're working at the moment.
Okay, thank you, Susie.
Did that answer the question, Greg, sufficiently?
Well, I mean, I would have to ask the person who submitted.
I'm just making sure I heard the question properly. Yeah.
Yes, I believe you did. Yeah, I believe you did. Thank you. The next question is one that comes up so frequently in terms of leadership, and that's about how can we improve our ability to influence upwards. You know, leading sideways and upwards, if you like. You know, so that our senior management are sensitive to the suggestions that we bring to them. So what can we do to improve our effectiveness of doing that sort of thing?
Can I take that? So, yeah.
Sorry, Arif, go for it.
Go ahead. Yeah. So when it comes to influencing others, whether it's direct reports or upper management, I think we need to know our habitual or default influence style. As you guys know, we have 5 influence styles. It's either inspiring or bridging, or assertive, or negotiative, or rational. So most of the time what happens is, one, we don't know what is our influence style, and it becomes naturally as an autopilot with everybody, with every context, with every situation. So I think the first step is knowing what is our influence style. Another thing is we're not being mindful on when to use this style or that style, and not being able to identify the other people influence style as well. I would say work on knowing yours, be mindful to pull out any influence style that is appropriate for the context. And that's how we start to develop being conscious to use the style we usually use.
Thank you, Arif. Susie, did you want to?
Yeah, no, I mean, that business about influencing and learning influencing skills are absolutely right. So, but the skill is about managing up, isn't it? I think that's what the question related to. How do you communicate up and develop that relationship in some way? And I think there's some interesting work around. I think there's some interesting work around the business of walking in the other person's shoes is what do they need to know, rather than, and what's the objective of why you want to manage up. So being strategic, thinking what are you communicating risk up, what's the desired outcome you want, and for what, and how does it meet the purpose of what the team is there to do. So yeah, so just a couple of thoughts there.
Brilliant. Now, I think we'll come now to the last question of the evening. And it's a really interesting one, and you'll understand why it is. And this question says, does being an expat or different nationality affect the team dynamics and the leadership? So, you know, I'm really conscious that, you know, if you like, the ethnicity of the people making up this tonight. So somebody's asked a very candid question, and does, you know, do the different nationalities affect the dynamic of the team and the way that you lead? So which of you, Arif, would you like, let's come to you first, and no holds barred, please.
I believe in any industries today, we have a lot of diversity, whether it's national or ethnics or gender. And one of the things is the ability to manage diversity. But does it affect the team? I think it all depends on the leader. Does it have an impact to manage it in a certain way? Of course, the culture, probably the language, probably some other aspects involved in there, of course, is going to impact the team flowness. And but it's not hard. I think been coaching a lot of executives who are managing diversified teams, not only in nationality or gender, but also in location. But I think this becomes the norm and a part of our life to manage that diversity.
That's great. Thank you. And Susie?
Well, I'm a great, well, having led different teams all around the world, I'd be interested to hear what the teams I led felt, actually. I think diversity brings a great strength. It must be said. It must be said, yeah.
Yeah, and I would agree. I think that diversity is the key, and what it does is it brings diversity of thinking. And most teams, you know, many organizations these days, you know, it's not only diversity, gender diversity, diversity of thought, diversity of ethnicity, it all adds to that rich mix. And, you know, nobody has a monopoly on good ideas. So the broader you can get that mix, the richer the ideas that come forth. So thank you so much. I think on that, we'll call an end to this evening's webinar. So Dr. Susie, Arif, I thank you so much for all the effort that you've put in and answering the questions. And I particularly thank everybody who's been listening and the rich questions that have come in. You know, I did have some questions in my back pocket just in case, and I haven't even had to go to them because you've been so fertile in the questions that you've asked. So thank you very much. And I know that, you know, we do have a LinkedIn profile, so you can find the Saudi Healthcare Leadership Academy on LinkedIn, so you can find us there. Otherwise, you can also email us if you have any further questions. All right, so thank you both. Thank you, audience, and we'll say good night. I'll end the webinar now. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you, Greg.
Thank you. Good night, Aaron. Thank you.
Good night.